When it comes to databases, there's a tremendous range. There are databases for relational systems. There are databases for NoSQL. There are large databases for high scalability, and there's some small ones for prototyping. In this case, we're going to be looking at one of those small prototyping databases. It is an NPM package called littledb, and in many instances, this fits the bill pretty well. It is not for high scale, it is not for high performance, but for prototyping and small little projects, this is a great little database. I'm going to go ahead and show you here the folder that we will be working on, which is 03_littledb. And I'm going to go ahead and drag the files onto the editor. And as you can see there, we have a write, a read, and a number of queries. We'll start off with the bare bones here. And as you can see, the top of the file is boilerplate. And I skipped the file there, where I will make some more comments in a moment. But before I do that, let me go ahead and install the dependencies for this. And I will do that by running npm install. And you'll note as well that within the terminal, I am in the same location, in the same folder. So I'm going to go ahead and run install. And now I will walk through the code, the boilerplate that is already in the file. And as you can see there within the first line, I require the package littledb. You can navigate to npm and read more about this small little package. The next two lines are the file system adapter, and it is identifying or designating a file called db.json that we will see in the file system once we run this. And lastly, it is being loaded onto that small package. We then do some inits, which in this case, I'm simply defining an object that has posts, and I will add some information to that once I get into writing the code. So I'm simply going to create an object here that I'm going to be pushing into the posts array. And within that object, I'm simply going to add a date. And this is so we can get some date stamping. I will use the date function, and I will then serialize to JSON. These are all language features that are built into JavaScript. I will then create the object, and I will call it post, and open up my curly braces, give it a title, and the title will simply be hello world. And then I'm going to add date and simply add there the variable that we just declared. Now we're going to be using the littledb object. We will use a function here called get. We will enter posts. And then the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be pushing. And if you want to see the full spectrum of functionality, navigate, as I mentioned, to npm JS and look up littledb, and you will see many examples, much like the one I am doing right now, plus additional functionality. So we're going to push, and we will push the post that we just defined, and then we will close off with a write. So that is the bare bones. Let's go ahead and run that at the console. Before I do that, let me just show you that there is no db.js or .json on the file system. And once I run it, there should be one. I'm going to go ahead and enter the name of the file. If we look at the file system, now we have a db.json. So if we enter that file name, you can see there that we now have a post. And if I run this again, and then again, we now should have, we should have 3 entries. And I'm going to go ahead and move this up. And yes, you can see there the different date stamps and the different entries. So the advantage of this is that we can now write a small application or a small node server, and we can persist data to the file system. As mentioned before, on small prototyping projects, this is pretty good functionality to be able to persist and reload information as you move from session to session or from experiment to experiment. Once again, it is not a high-performance database. It is simply a small utility to be able to do persistence. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a read. So let's go ahead and move to that file. And in order to read the content back, The command is pretty simple. We're just simply going to do a console.log. Inside of it, I will once again enter db.get and then posts, then value, reading it back. And now we're going to go ahead and run this on the file system. So I'm going to go ahead and enter node 02, which is the name of the next file. Let me go ahead and scroll this up so you can see the output. And as you can see there, we get the content that is stored within the database. In the last file, I'm simply going to show you a number of queries. And let me go ahead and give ourselves here a little bit more room. I have started off with the boilerplate just as before. And then I have added a number of posts. So let me go ahead and delete here my database. So I'm simply going to enter rm.db, and now we will have a clean database that will only have the content that we see here. As you can see, it is simply 4 objects. Each of them have a different title: Hello World, Boston Cool, Code Cancun, and then an ID and whether it is published or not. And the reason for that is simply to be able to do some queries based on this information. So there's a number of queries that I want to illustrate here. The very first one is simply counting the posts. And I'm going to go ahead and post the code for that. As you can see there, it is post.size.value. And if you're wondering how come we have posts as opposed to db.getPost, that is because I've created here a shorter version of that. I'm holding that object already, and so I don't have to type in every time db.get parentheses post. And so I can simply do post. So in this case, I will simply do post.size.value. So let me go ahead and save that. And I'm going to go ahead and clear my screen here. Then I will run the example, which is 03. And as you can see there, we have 4 posts as expected. The next one is, can we find all of the IDs for the posts that have been entered? And as you can see there, we can do so by using a mapping function. Again, this is part of the functionality that is defined in the documentation, and then writing that value out. I'm going to go ahead and run that again. And as you can see there, we have the posts. And the reason we have double the number of IDs is because since we've run the file 2 times, we now have the number of entries here that we had in lines 11 through 14 being written twice. And the more times that we run the file, the more content we're going to get into the database. So let me go ahead and just finish it up here with 2 entries. One of them is doing a search, matching a property on the objects, which is published false, the first one. And the second one is going to be doing matches on entries with code, with titles of Code Madrid, as you can see there. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to go ahead and run it again. And as you can see there, we have output. The first one is matching all of the ones that are of post equal false. And then we also have the IDs just as before. And the very last one is matching Code Madrid here as we expected. So again, this is some of the functionality of this small little database. And this is just an illustration of the querying capabilities. For the full functionality, please refer to the documentation.